Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor, Greg Dooley, and the Pundit, Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
Juwan Howard is out. Michigan's basketball season, though, seemed like it ended months ago, and the NCAA bracket is revealed. Can the Big Ten ever win this thing? And just when Ohio State fans start chest thumping, Michigan and Sherrone deliver another blow. But the football team itself just still can't stay out of the negative news. But first, this is the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. We're presented by Nick Hopwood, a certified financial planner, founder and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Congrats to Peak, by the way, on celebrating its 10-year anniversary. Tech continues to be a major reason in the stock market rally, but will it last? Is there a pause, or will there be a new market leader in the year to come? Now is a great opportunity to take your stock and redesign your portfolio. We highly recommend going to Nick's website at peakwm.com. Greg, it's only been a week, but a lot has happened.
It has, including some listener love, Steve. I love the love. JDA commented, Steve and Greg do a great job. Greg adds a ton of color. Steve is a whiz on the stats, as a pundit should be.
Pundits.
GH said he picked us up in late November. He'll be a regular listener now on. Thank you. Ted says he loves the show. He loves the new logo, Steve.
I love it too.
And he says he loves hearing Carl's voice in the intro. And he asks, are fans able to purchase the new shirts? Guys, we may have some giveaways. We can't sell them just because they do have the Block M and some other stuff on them. But we may do that. So we love the comments. And by the way, we picked up followers, Steve, during our break. So be like them. Follow us.
Follow me. Follow me to freedom.
But you mentioned it already, Steve. I got to say, Juwan Howard, I was very surprised he got let go. People have been asking me at Huskers, right, on the phone, over text, like, what's going to happen? And
what do you think?
I don't think it's going to happen.
What's your opinion off the record?
I said that Ward hired this man. Ward took all the backslaps when things were going great for Juwan, and it wasn't that long ago.
We've got a trend where Ward doesn't act.
And it paid off big time for holding on to Jim Harbaugh when, again, and you're listening, I know you're out there, you're listening, you wanted him fired. He said, no, I'm going to give him a chance. I just saw all of that happening, and so the news surprised me, Steve. What was your take on this?
I've kind of learned from Rich Rodriguez, Brady Hoke, when it comes to when you fire somebody, I can argue and lawyer either side of the room on whether to retain or whether to fire. To me, it's both on the coaches and on the roster that makes it up. So last season, if we want to review, we're talking about a 3-year steady decline and a steep decline in year 3. Last season, this is 2022-2023, they couldn't close out close games. They were 3-12 in games decided by 6 points or less. And of those 3 wins, Greg, 2 of them were to the Mid-American Conference, and the other one was Minnesota, the team that finished last in the Big Ten standings that year. Now, you can blame the coaches for not drawing up the right offensive and defensive plays in crunch time, or you can blame the players for not having a single player that can lead by example. So now you have Hunter Dickinson, Jett Howard, and Kobe Buffin, who decided not to stay. So predicting a dismal 2024 season like I did, and you did, doesn't make us a psychic or clairvoyant. They didn't replace them, however, with anyone of note. And to me, that says something. If your plan A is to retain at least one of them and you can't retain any of them, let's go to plan B and try to get somebody else in there. And they didn't do it. So what are you left with? You're left with kind of the same makeup. Losing close games continued until they no longer were involved in close games. They were competitive in the first half. That tells me they were prepared to win going into the game. The second half happens. That's when adversity strikes. The other coaches regroup. They change things up. Michigan couldn't respond on the fly. So when you don't respond on the fly, that's once again, you can argue both players and coaches about what happens in the second half of ball games. Michigan was the only team in the Big Ten that didn't have a single representative on this year's All Big Ten team. Nobody on the first, nobody on the second, nobody on the third team, no honorable mentions, No one on the all-defensive team, no one on the all-freshman team. Thankfully, Will Cheddar made it to the all-sportsman team.
The all-sportsman team.
To avoid the absolute, complete shutout. Then you have coaching adversity with Juwan's health, Coach Sanderson incident, NIL, and then talking earlier about, hey, Michigan couldn't replace the guys like Howard and Bufkin and Dickinson that left. Juwan and staff had a plan. Their names were Terrence Shannon Jr. and Caleb Love. They're absolutely killing it for Illinois and Arizona this season. If Michigan had both of those players, we'd have a different story. But there's too many issues going on. And if academic compliance won't pass them, then why were they presented and why were they told they could be at Michigan in the first place? I could certainly defend this coaching staff, but there's just too much that needs fixing. Now an overhaul is completely needed. Doug McDaniel is hitting the portal. I'm sure there are going to be other players hitting the portal as well. And this is what happens when a program is looking for a new coach.
No, and I say I was surprised, but I got to say, remove the personal side out of it. Many of you know that, like, Phil Martelli is an incredible guest speaker in my history of college athletics class. I've had some of these student athletes, many of them. We've gotten to know some of the coaches over the years, the assistant coaches, because they've stuck around, right? Wanted these guys to succeed. It feels rough, but I'm excited, Steve, that it did happen. I hate to say it. Outside of all the personal stuff, I'm excited it happened because I didn't see anything fixing this. And if you're in that mode, if you can't even bear to watch, I knew they were playing on Wednesday. I didn't even bother to check what time and when their game was going to be on to watch them in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. I'm not alone, right?
No, look at Chrysler Arena. Larry Lade sending the pictures of what Chrysler Arena looked like 5 minutes before tip-off.
Right.
Man.
No, and and Ward's got to be doing the math there too, because maybe those tickets were sold that were empty. A lot of them, at least, but
isn't that even worse, Greg? If the tickets are sold and you choose not to go, I mean, the cost is already done. You've already paid your money for it.
Yeah, it's funny. I usually get, Steve, you've gone with me. We usually get invited to a game or two. I didn't even get an invite this year, because I don't even think anyone wants to go. I'm sorry, it was that bad. So I guess I was shocked, but in a good way. I think this is the right thing to do. I think Ward deserves credit. I do wonder, Steve, do you think it's possible that Ward offered Juwan a path to return with conditions, and those conditions were not accepted by Juwan and he left? Or do you think he just straight went down? Because he easily could have looked at the Sanderson information along with the no tolerance policy and all, despite what they said, and of course finishing last in the Big Ten and limping briefly out of the Big Ten tournament. The sum total of it, he had enough grounds to make this change. But for the reasons I stated before, he hired them. He succeeded by giving people a chance. I wonder if he said, well, these are the conditions. Just like he made conditions with Jim Harbaugh. And Juwan said, I ain't doing that.
That's a possibility. I'm not aware of that. I know that, and I think you'll agree with me, that Ward likes to have a year-end review. A lot of athletic directors do this. They have a year-end review, and they present things. It's like, well, how do you suppose you're going to solve this?
Yeah.
And maybe the feedback wasn't what Ward wanted to hear, and therefore made a decision based on that. But I mean, your hypothetical could be right.
We're going to keep it on.
Yeah,
it's like nose to the grindstone, Ward.
Look, let's say I'm Juwan Howard. It says all these things are happening. You could say, well, look, this is my roster, and it's not great. And I think it could have been great if the compliance department would have let Terrence Shannon Jr. and Caleb Love in. We'd be talking a different story. And look, as a coaching staff, we have done this before. We were a minute shy of going to a Final Four. We have gone to a Sweet 16. It's not us. Now, if you do something like that and don't take any self-introspective and say, this is what I've learned about things that I need to do better, maybe that's a red flag.
Yeah. Or
maybe.
Yeah, just maybe. Yeah, like if there was that opportunity and Juwan said, look, my health was a mess. You supported me. I'm going to get this right. My health is good. Staff-wise, I'm going to make some changes because something has to change. I've got some ideas for NIL funding. I've got some ideas here for coaching. We got these great inroads with these recruits, which is true. Hey, I need 2 more years. And Ward would say, I'll give you one. We don't know. I'm just speculating. Right. This all could have happened. We don't know.
To me, the biggest problem is this deal with Caleb Love and Terrence Shannon Jr. because they committed to Michigan. And if they are committing to Michigan, you got to believe that the coaching staff told them you'll have no issues getting in. Any red tape that has to do with your transfer, it's settled. They announce they're coming. And then all of a sudden, if you're one of those two players, you feel like the rug got pulled out from underneath you and you're completely shocked to learn that I am not coming. And then you do the process all over again. To have that happen twice, that's a red flag to me about something in the organization.
Okay, like casual fans point at U of M's rigidity in this manner, but I think you're right. Like, if it happens twice, maybe it's on you. Like, what did you actually say to these guys?
The former can be true. They could be rigid to the point where, is it really worth it? And maybe we should have an ethics discussion. And how much does winning mean to the casual fan as compared to being leaders and best and all this stuff that we've heard since childbirth. If you have this happen to you twice, you should probably know what the expectations were coming in before you tell said player, we're good.
Yeah.
Only to find out you're not.
Absolutely. There was all kinds of mess with the John Sanderson stuff. But if Ward knew he was going to fire Juwan, wouldn't he have said, hey, John, why don't you stick around?
No.
There may be an opportunity for you, or was it too messy? And I hate to make light of this because it sounds like it got pretty brutal. And again, a man and his family, because he went to Illinois, is that right?
Yeah,
he took a job.
He's been hired at Illinois, as not in the same capacity as a consultant at the moment. Now that may change as he sticks around Champaign-Urbana as time goes by, but right now he's a consultant. Of course, Illinois' strength and conditioning coach is probably going, what's going on here? Do I need to call my real estate agent? Anyway, that's part of the collateral damage that happened in all of this, that in the effort of sticking around with it as long as it has, you lose this player. Now, if Juwan Howard and company stays even longer, maybe even worse damage gets done. I don't know. Maybe the athletic director gets fired for not doing anything. I mean, that could be collateral damage for keeping on hanging on.
Oh, yeah. No. So, Steve, what does that ideal coach look like? I've heard some names thrown around, some young, some hot guys who've made runs in the tournament. I've heard names like John Beilein come back for a few years and get this back on the track. To you, what does this look like?
First of all, just me getting on my soapbox about coaching hires. When you see coaching hires happen within 6 hours of somebody being fired, these are just names being drawn out of the hat because they either have Michigan ties or they're a hot coach coming up, and everybody assumes that, of course, this is going to work out and we're going to be able to pull a name from that pool. And when you actually start doing some digging and realizing that the agents haven't even talked to the coaches yet, then they really shouldn't be on a name board to begin with.
Okay.
Alabama's Nate Oates just signed a contract extension, so he's out. Shaka Smart got a contract extension, I think, last year with a high buyout, so that's not going to really happen. People are just getting the names from their own Rolodex, put it out there, and then do the investigative research. So fair. That happens. Now, as to your question, perfect candidate. To me, Midwest ties, young, but a credible track record, a salesman who can raise NIL money, a player's coach who players can identify with. There's not many out there that fit all that criteria, but based on where Michigan is at, I'm going to predict that people won't be too thrilled. Now, I think there was excitement over John Beilein when he was hired because he had NCAA success at West Virginia, and even with Tommy Amaker, considered at the time one of the best of the Krzyzewski assistants. But why don't everybody go back for a moment and look at the hires in all of the Big Ten in the last 10, 15 years? And can you come out feeling that most were probably pretty underwhelming hires? I mean, look at Indiana since Bob Knight.
Yep.
There was nearly a revolt by the fans in Wisconsin over Greg Gard and the way that was handled. Fran McCaffrey at Iowa raised a lot of eyebrows. Richard Pitino and Ben Johnson at Minnesota, even more eyebrows being raised. Either coaches have stayed around forever like Tom Izzo, or the new people coming in, people are going, what? Who? Really? That's all we could get? Even look at North Carolina and Duke when they replaced legends. The initial reaction is, man, I think they could have done better.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of that with Beeline. You're right. He had the name, and then as you looked into it deeper, so many people came out and said, no, this is the right guy. This is the guy. But you're basically warning us, Steve, to be disappointed.
Yeah.
With the coaching.
When we see all of these names that are available and it looks great, and right now there's probably a dozen. I mean, do you really think that Shaka Smart is coming to Michigan after he's really getting Marquette up to snuff and building a program?
The only reason I say maybe not Shaka Smart is because he coached at Texas, right? So he lived the big football school.
Right.
It's a perfect, and it didn't work out for him. Why would you want a Michigan? Okay.
It's at a basketball school now.
And Marquette has a great basketball tradition.
They're doing fine.
Yeah.
They're ranked.
They're doing fine.
They're ranked. They're playing in a good conference that annually puts teams out there. The defending national champ is from the Big East. So
and it's kind of cool being the king of Marquette, which he is, right? It's kind of cool.
I think there is just an assumption that if somebody's good, well, obviously they have their eyes towards Ann Arbor, or Bloomington, or Durham, or Lawrence, Kansas, and that's just not necessarily the case. A lot of times, people are happy with where they're at and afraid of destroying it and upsetting a good thing going.
We're going to get a name so under the radar that he's going to come on the Professor and the Pundit. We'll
score the first interview.
Okay.
Yeah,
now,
I think that's great.
If Ward were like other ADs, they always keep a few names at the ready. But at this day and age, all these agents are connected. So the word's out there with all the agents. And I don't know how much Ward actually has to do to hear from all of these people that talk, like who's actually interested, right? I've heard this guy is Florida Atlantic, Dusty
May.
Yes, he's on everyone's list. Right?
Yes, he was on the Columbus list until they decided to promote within.
Yeah.
Dusty May is the top of everybody's coaching vacancy list.
So one thing that hope we'll be enjoying, but not as much because our team wasn't anywhere close to any kind of bracket, is the NCAA tournament. We got to see our first glimpse of the bracket itself. One of my big flaws in picking brackets was I always favored the teams that I knew. Like, I knew the Big Ten. Like, they get that point guard, I get that big man. And I always had them going too far. And historically, I got really, really beat up for that. The one team that tended to do pretty good lately was Michigan, at least one of them, right? We've had a lot of problems in the Big Ten as a conference, in the NCAA tournament.
To win your bracket, you must pick the national champion. I haven't met anybody who won their bracket and didn't pick the national champion right, unless you're playing like a bracket within your family and 3 or 4 people, and it doesn't matter. But it's been 24 years since a Big Ten team won. Michigan State back in 2000. Purdue is the number 1 seed. I think the big question about Purdue is, did they learn anything from last season's first round loss to Fairleigh Dickinson? And of course, the only reason why I'm familiar and remember the name Fairleigh Dickinson is because as a 16 seed, they nearly upset Michigan in 1985. The first number 1 seed to bow down was Virginia just a few years ago. Purdue was the second team ever to lose to a 16 seed. Did Purdue learn anything? And I think Purdue's future is really going to be determined by the officials and how they call a game around Zach Edey. I have watched a ton of Purdue games this year, and it's different. And sometimes Zach Edey gets called for fouls he shouldn't be, and sometimes the guys defending him get called for fouls that they shouldn't be. And how officials decide to call the game around Zach Edey is probably going to determine Purdue's future. Their backcourt guards grow up to be sophomores. They were freshmen last year, and they got a senior transfer on the wing named Lance Jones from Southern Illinois. He's a big addition. And I think these guys are not going to be Zach Edey and the rest. I think this team is going to be a little bit different in that they have some complementary players. But I still wonder, because this is a team that lost to Wisconsin in the Big Ten semifinals, and it just takes a lot of little things to happen all at once, but they found a way to lose in overtime. I think Illinois, Greg, has athletes. Terrence Shannon Jr., we talked about how he should have been a Wolverine.
Yep.
Marcus Domask, Courtney Hawkins, Dane Danger, This reminds me of the athletes that Michigan used to have, but they would have their moments of just kind of losing it. Right when it comes into crunch time, they make these athletic moves that win the game for them. And they had big comebacks during the course of the Big Ten tournament and won the Big Ten tournament. Brad Underwood, though, is so unlikable. He's pissed off all the time. And in public doesn't say anything nice about his players. I'm just waiting for Underwood to become like Julius Caesar by his underappreciated players. Figuratively, of course, in that.
Of course.
But the reality is, if you spend a little time following Illinois, the players really do like him, like Michigan State's players really do like Tom Izzo, and they appreciate the tough love approach. And maybe, just maybe, the never satisfied, never pleased look drives the players to dig in even further in hopes that they'll get the occasional attaboy, from the person that spurns them on a constant and regular basis. But I'm not sure I can trust Illinois. I'm not sure I can trust Purdue. What about you?
I don't, I followed it a little bit. I don't trust the Big Ten teams. I'll say it right off the bat. I know the other number one seeds. What do you got? Tennessee, Houston, UConn. By the way, did you see that Mattress Mac? This guy who's the
Yes.
Astros fan who places the big bet, he's back at it.
Oh, yeah.
He's using NIL money to pay for friends and family of the Houston players to travel, which is great. I'm actually going to speak about Mattress Mac in my NIL class a little bit.
Did you hear the local radio commercials for Mattress Mac when we were in Houston?
No, I didn't.
This guy is famous for making big bets on the local team or some real high payoff, and basically offering his clients, if you spend the money on me and this team wins, you get your furniture for free. And then he uses insurance money to pay off the losses just in case. Somehow he's making money on this business model.
Yes.
And we're talking about him.
And he's turned to NIL too, which he can just do. He can just sponsor players who the idea is that they'll give this money to support people traveling. It's clever. Michigan basketball needs a Mattress Mac. I don't know who that is out there. Maybe it's one of the listeners. I think UConn, if I had to pick, I know that's chalk, but I feel like they are at a different level, and I think they're going to do it. But I don't know. I'm hoping for a lot of upsets and a lot of fun. We'll see. I'm actually more interested, Steve, in the women's tournament because we do have a team in the fight. And I happen to know that some of the players were a little nervous about actually getting in. They felt like they were going to get in, but they were talking 10 or 11 seed maybe. They actually got the 9. They got to play Kansas in the first round. And if they win, it looks like they're going to play USC, the number 1 seed.
Right.
And they have this Juju Watkins, this 6'2" freshman point guard, who's
the next big thing.
She is nowhere like as polished as Caitlin Clark, but she can get to the rack and she can shoot it from a long distance. So that's exciting. And I happen to know that the team did not want to go to Baton Rouge, which was one of the options if you looked at the bracketology. And they are excited about going to LA. And they play on Saturday in the first round, which is cool for me. So I'm looking forward to watching it.
They beat Indiana in the Big Ten tournament in Minneapolis on Friday. Had that huge come-from-behind deficit and then won it going away. And that absolutely gave them that log. Now, maybe it was done before then because they got the number 9. But still, all in all, as a Michigan fan, you felt comfortable at that point when you were playing Iowa in the semifinals at that point. Win or lose, you felt Michigan was going to be in. And Kim Barnes-Arico has this streak of how many wins she gets in a particular season. She met that with the win at Indiana.
Love it.
Congratulations
all
to
the
them.
young ladies watched at looked like Kim's house, and I'm happy for them. I'm excited. I look forward. I think I'll see some of the players this week, and they're off to L.A. So awesome. And we, Steve, are off to halftime.
That means it's halftime on The Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark. And we're now joined by our sponsor, Nick Hopwood, a certified financial planner, the president and founder of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with confidence. Nick, earlier we discussed the difference between a traditional 401k/IRA versus a Roth 401k/IRA. Withdrawing money for retirement is taxed in a traditional, while the Roth isn't because you've already paid taxes on it during its pre-growth state. A lot of people like me have both the traditional and a Roth. Which money should I take out first in retirement?
Steve, this is the hottest topic in financial planning now. I call it tax optimization. So when you're in retirement, you generally have Social Security, maybe a pension, and your portfolio. Okay? We're counseling people to delay that Social Security. So then we have a few years, this retirement red zone, if you will, where we could take those IRA withdrawals and only pay 12% tax on those withdrawals, up to around $100,000. So for a lot of people, that could cover their entire cost of living, and you're only paying 12%. If you need more money, hopefully you have a brokerage account on the side, which is only subject to dividends and capital gains, and we can stay under that 12% bracket. And the Roth could be needed to manage that 12% bracket as well, but I prefer to delay the Roth as long as possible. Now, if you have a great big brokerage account, rather than taking IRA withdrawals to fund your income need and your cost of living, we could do Roth conversions at 12% up to $100,000. And now that is getting into tax-free forever. And we're really depleting the pre-tax bucket and growing the tax-free bucket with tax optimization, 12% brackets.
Thanks, Nick. We'll have more in-depth conversations with the advantages of Roth IRAs in the upcoming weeks. But if you can't wait, go to peakwm.com or call 734-681-7575. That's peakwm.com.
So, Steve, I think we've dominated every episode with Michigan football. And we have some Michigan football news. Some great news, some disturbing news, but let's go with the good stuff first. What happened here?
I mean, normally this news alone would be the first thing we would talk about in other weeks, but there was just too much going on in basketball to ignore it any further. And by the way, we're actually even going to talk Michigan hockey for a little bit before the end of the program.
So Ohio State's longtime running back coach, you guys have heard this by now, Coach Alford joins the staff. Other than a few insiders, I include Sam Webb among them because they obviously had to vet this guy and had to go through all the HR process with the coaching staff, which apparently they're using now. It seemed to shock everybody, and this was almost like a shot across the bow and another win for Michigan over Ohio State to take their running backs coach.
They will need a dastardly fate here for that.
When there's been all this good news and Chip Kelly and all these good things coming out of Columbus, we got one of their coaches, and we needed one, right? So
just when the Ohio State fans were coming out of their cave and beating their chest and talking about winning the Big Ten title as a foregone conclusion, shutting down Ohio State fans only is good for about 30 days at most. There's an expiration on that. Before they come out, they feel refreshed. Their snot-nosed mouths, start running again. And this stings the Buckeyes in the same way it did for Michigan fans when Greg Madison and Al Washington left for Ohio State just 5 years ago. It was a gut punch then. It is a gut punch now. Michigan returning the favor and did it during the middle of the Buckeye spring practice. The Buckeyes are used to doing this to other teams. Not only did they do it to Michigan in 2019, but you may remember Larry Johnson, a very beloved defensive line coach at Penn State. He was plucked away from Penn State by Urban Meyer in 2014. Tony Alford himself was lured away from Notre Dame in 2015. His recruits included Zeke Elliott, Mike Weber, who was in a big battle between Ohio State and Michigan before he decided to choose the Buckeyes, J.K. Dobbins, Travion Henderson. But what you're going to hear out of Columbus is the propaganda and the disinformation about how Alford was held up by a well-run program, not by his own individual merits, and are already coming up with the excuses that if the Buckeyes lose this November, including but not limited to, Greg, Alford bringing intimate knowledge of the Ohio State's offense and defense during spring installs because Ohio State had already started spring practice and took a week off because of spring break. And in the middle of that, Tony Alford comes to Michigan. He did Connor Stallion's work for him. No iPhones necessary. No away tickets to Columbus was necessary. It is great popcorn-eating, comical material to hear and see what's being said and written. I especially saw a video that's called Instant Reactions, and they were almost speechless between how angry they are to it's not such a big deal because they just can't comprehend what's going on.
It was such big news that it stopped my history of college athletics class. Now, students are not supposed to use their devices, but someone did, and someone had it, or got a thing on their phone and said, hey, or their watch and said, hey, you're not going to believe this.
There's a TV commercial on CNBC that I think you and I see a lot.
Yeah.
Where somebody's doing this presentation
right.
and everybody in the set realizes they've been
out.
hacked.
Yeah, that's a
and they
cyber
start
attack.
jumping on. It's like, you must have gone through the same thing. You're doing this big speech and everyone's looking at their phones and going,
I think, or more likely, my counterpart in Columbus was going through that. Everyone was seeing like the attack from Michigan. The sanitized version is, it wasn't so much that Alford left; it was that he went to Michigan. Like that. That's the latest talk track, right? Like he wasn't so great, but we'll admit that kind of sucks because he went to Michigan and with all he knows or doesn't know or whatever. So it's exciting to see how this will play out. We still don't know what Mike Hart is doing for a career. We just know it doesn't look like he's coming back to Michigan.
No.
So we'll see where Mike Hart went. He's certainly served his time well here, and his reputation's great. I think he wants to be next in line for a head coaching job or get a head coaching job if it comes up. We'll see where he goes.
Mike Hart was one of my favorite players all time at Michigan.
He's one of the best players I've seen at Michigan, and this isn't hyperbole. Over the stretch of all the carries he had, he was remarkable at getting an extra 2 or 3 yards on every run.
Rolling over people.
Yeah.
The best thing I've seen a football player do in quite some time, and usually that involves a pass or a catch. But Mike Hart, at one point, was parallel to the ground, okay, flat out, and he needed an extra yard, and he had the strength, and I think Blake Corum's strength would allow him to do this too, but I've never seen anything quite like it. He's in the air, and he's going down. Gravity is taken over, and he sticks 1 foot toe down on the turf and manages to launch from that. That's such superior strength and agility that I just could not comprehend in the moment. And he launched himself another 1.5 to 2 yards from that point. So imagine you're falling down. Your head and your feet are the same distance off the ground. You stub a toe down and somehow manage to get liftoff from your toes only. Not from a standing or reclined position, but flat out. To me, it's a great football move that's never been shown very often.
No, it's fantastic. I was asked to put together a top 25 Michigan football players of all time.
That's
I know.
hard.
Well, that's why they asked like someone like me to do it because no one likes to do that
Nobody
stuff.
wants to do it.
So he's on there, and I think he's still on there, right? I feel pretty strong about that. So anyway, and by the way, it was truly all time. Okay, this was Bill Willie Heston. This was back in the day. Okay. Off the field, we had an incident with one of the coaches, Steve. I found out via press release from media relations, and it didn't use anyone's last names. It just said Greg made a mistake, and it just talked about Greg because it was a quote from Sherrone Moore, and I'm like, Greg, oh, that's one of the new coaches.
Probably thinking, what did I do?
What did I do? Why is Sherrone?
Because you got an email.
It did say Greg. You see your name. It doesn't have a last name. But no joking, of course, OWI in Michigan, operating a vehicle while intoxicated, apparently happened, clear cut, admitted it to the coaching staff. Who knows legal ramifications and all that, but suspended indefinitely. It's not so much to me that this happened. Things happen in people's lives, and everyone goes, why did he take an Uber? We make mistakes. It's the sum total of these little nicks and cuts that we just keep doing to ourselves, Steve, that bugs me.
Death by 1,000 cuts?
Yeah.
This Michigan football program can't seem to find a way to stay out of the negative spotlight. And I know the negative news becomes billboard headlines when you're a successful football team. And if you're not a successful football team, you're probably not going to hear about it from a nationwide standpoint. And I certainly don't believe Michigan is a rogue program by any means. But it just seems like it's one thing after another, and you're starting to feel a little snake bitten in this point where, again, somebody our age group talks about a program that doesn't do anything wrong or stays out of the news. To have these things feeling like they're always going on is a bit disappointing.
It is, and I don't want to go through a list of all the little things you guys know what we're talking about, but here's
plenty of
another one.
Buckeyes and Spartans will do that for you.
All right, so hockey. We have not talked a lot of hockey on this show. on the uptick a little bit, has found its way in the Big Ten Championship again, has had a lot of success in the Big Ten hockey tournament of late. Steve, what do you see here? What do we got coming up?
Well, congratulations to Michigan hockey, because they will play the number 1 seed, and it's Michigan State at the MUN for the Big Ten tournament title. I'm not sure what I'm more surprised about, that Michigan was on the cusp of not making the playoff because of their rankings in the pairwise, or that Michigan State is the number 1 seed because they haven't been a number 1 seed in quite some time. So Michigan, the number 4 seed in this tournament, won at Minnesota last Saturday night by a score of 2-1. It's the 3rd consecutive year that the Wolverines beat the Gophers at the Mariucci in the Big Ten tournament. So you want to talk about snake bit, that's Golden Gopher fans losing to Michigan on their home ice. It is also their 4th consecutive game with a 1-goal victory. The last time that happened was like 98 years ago. This kind of thing, I think, puts a lot of pressure on your netminder, Jake Parchesky, but he's coming through. The top 6 scorers in the Big Ten are all Wolverines. I mean, that would seem pretty much impossible in the world of basketball, where the top 6 scorers in your conference would all come from the same team. So there are some interesting things to look at.
Yeah, no, definitely. I can talk a little bit to State. So their coach, Adam Nightingale, the reason I know him is because I've heard glowing words about him from Michigan hockey players on campus, because he coached the junior and the under 18 teams, but they've had exposure and they like this guy. The other thing they did was they don't play in Yost, but they have an old barn, MUN. Relatively at the time, it was a new hockey. It needed to be upgraded. And from everything I heard, and I haven't been up there, they just did an incredible job with the renovation and made it like this World Cup. So they got all of that going for it. Norado, they've had a lot of third period breakdowns.
That's our hockey coach. For those that don't know.
Yeah, sorry, Coach Norado, Brendan Norado. He took over from Mel Pearson. Of late, he's had some third-period breakdowns. There's some concerns. They are giving up a lot of goals. That's why we also score a lot of goals, Steve. That's why we have all these top scorers. But we give up a lot. They're starting to firm it up in the third period a little bit. We'll see how it translates. By the way, if you're projecting out, the hockey tournament is actually very prescriptive in that they use a formula called a pairwise, where if you are in the top whatever, it's 16-team tournament, if you're in that top area after the at-large bids who weren't ranked, you are in. And right now, Michigan is firmly in the hockey, so they're looking good.
So I think if the old CCHA and there's another conference, they get an automatic berth, but none of their teams are in the top 16. So they're going to take 2 away. So like if you're 15 or 16 in the pairwise right now, you're sweating bullets.
Yeah.
But in case you're wondering, the Wolverines lost 3 of 4 to the Spartans this season, who are having their best season maybe since winning it all in 2007. They haven't won a Big Ten tournament title. Michigan State last winning the CCHA title the same year they won the national championship in 2007. So now that's kind of must-see TV.
No, it's going to be great. I was hoping that Ohio State would upset Michigan State because that would have meant that they would have played this game at Yost, of course.
Right.
But it'll be great. Steve, can we talk about Trev Alberts maybe? So what happened here? This is kind of fascinating, right? Like he left for Texas A&M as the athletic director of Nebraska.
The same day that Tony Alford came to Michigan and really blew up the minds of people in Columbus, the minds have been blown even further. If one was an atomic bomb in Columbus, this was a nuclear bomb out in Lincoln, Nebraska. Trev Alberts, their favorite son, leaves Nebraska for Texas A&M. Now, this is fascinating to me for 2 reasons, because Alberts appeared to be a lifer at Nebraska. Trev Alberts played for the Nebraska football team back in the 90s. Currently, though, the basketball team is making their first tournament appearance in 10 years. The football team has Matt Rule because of Trev Alberts, and the number 1 overall recruit in this year's football class at quarterback.
Yeah.
Okay? They're in the middle of renovating Memorial Stadium for a $400 million price tag. You got 90,000 people to show up for an outdoor volleyball game. Has his own radio show. And just last November, that's 4 months ago, Nebraska doubled his salary. He's like the second highest paid athletic director in the Big Ten. He absolutely appeared to be, Greg, to be living his best life.
His best life.
Yeah.
His best life.
Not an average life, not a better life, his best life.
This is Trev Albert's best life. You're right. And they're a comer, right? They've got a good basketball team. They got all this stuff going for them.
And his departure has everyone in the state asking, why? Why? When there's a job opening, though, dominoes follow. Okay, so Tony Alford left Ohio State to become Michigan's running back coach. You think Ohio State's going to be short a coach come football season? No, they're going to grab somebody big, and that's going to cause more openings and more dominoes to fall. So what happens here? Nebraska's president, recently became the president at Ohio State. That former Nebraska president hired Texas A&M's AD to replace the recently retired legend Archie Griffin. Then, in only 3 degrees of Kevin Bacon, A&M hires Alberts to fill their vacancy.
Somebody like Bum Bright, the guy who tried to lure Bo Schembechler to go to Texas A&M, walked into that office and said, fix this. What do you need from me to fix this? And that's what they did.
And if you've gotten to know about power structures and money, a lot of people think Texas rules the state. Texas A&M actually may be the one that raises the most money, foolishly spends the most money, doesn't care. Their student body now is like up to 70,000 undergrads. Why 70,000? Because one of those guys is going to strike it rich.
Right. That's right.
And it's not going to be one either. It's going to be several.
That's a lot of 12th men, so to speak.
Exactly.
I heard, did you see this quote from this former Nebraska AD?
Oh, Bill Moose.
Yeah, he said, he's talking about like fan mentality of people in the athletic department. He said, what creeps in and takes footholds? It's the attitude of, this is how we've always done it. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
He goes, I used to say, well, you haven't done it right since 1997. And we know what that year was.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember, did Bill Moose leave voluntarily from Nebraska? I don't think he did.
I don't know.
I think Bill Moose was the guy who hired Scott Frost. I could be wrong on that, and our listeners might correct me for our next podcast. Yeah, I mean, look, we've heard that at Michigan. We've certainly heard that at Penn State. We do things in that particular way. Speaking of college football, though, all the commissioners of all the football conferences and Notre Dame finally figured out how much revenue everybody's going to take from ESPN's new contract offer, starting in 2026. We've got a major hurdle cleared, but there's a lot more to agree to. But here's the money quotient. It's $7.8 billion over 6 seasons that ESPN's giving. Now, there was a rush to get this done because ESPN was saying this contract has a shelf life. This offer has a shelf life, and we may pull it. It's taken about 2 years for the NCAA committee to agree on anything, or the athletic directors and the power conferences to agree on anything because of all the power shuffles and things like that. But they were able to kind of get this figured out over the last couple of weeks. In previous seasons, Greg, the Power Five split all the money nearly evenly, but because they can, the Big Ten and the SEC strong-armed themselves into each getting 29% of the money. The ACC gets 17%, the Big 12 gets 14%, and Notre Dame gets only 1%, but still, when you multiply that by 18 teams, it's sort of like getting 18%, and they get to keep it all.
Yeah.
Forget about the specific numbers that I just stated to you, and just understand who's getting paid equal and how far off the other conferences are and what it means. The TV contract for the regular season already favored the Big Ten and the SEC by a 2-to-1 ratio over anyone else. It's also 2-to-1 over the Big 12 for the playoff. That means it's likely that the teams in the Big Ten and the SEC, they can afford bigger coaching contracts, bigger support staff, better facilities, better technology.
More revenue sharing if it comes to that.
Well, yeah, and that's a big one that hasn't been decided yet.
Yeah.
And as I've said for almost a year now, it is better to eat than to be eaten. and the ACC and the Big 12 are being bitten slowly, and the Pac-12 has been fully absorbed and eaten away. A different set of circumstances could have happened if the Big 10 just stood pat a couple of years ago. You may not like what they did, and I'm one of them, but I'd like it a lot less if the Big 10 got absorbed like the Pac-12 did or relegated to what the ACC and the Big 12 are right now.
Absolutely. You said it. Nope, money's driving it. The playoff format, though, has not quite been decided because they are talking about expanding pretty clearly here, like soon.
Right. Yeah. So 2026, they're hoping it will go from 12 to 14 teams. So this 12-team playoff may only go for 2 years. Why go to 14? So that the Big 10 and the SEC can make even more money, and to some degree, the other conferences as well. The Power 2, though, during the negotiations, Greg, that hasn't been finalized yet, proposed first-round buys for their champions and automatic number 1 and number 2 seeds, and the increased amount of automatic berths for their member conferences over the rest of the country that will lead to bigger paydays if and when they decide to reward winners of each game with even more money. So that didn't go so well.
When I see people react, like, what do you expect the Big Ten and SEC to do, right? They're trying to get this thing to pay off as much as they possibly can.
And why?
Yeah.
Why? One, it's one thing. I don't think we have to worry about the Big Ten and the SEC being absorbed. But the big why of grabbing as much money as you can in the moment and using your leverage to do it, because it's uncertain how the courts are going to rule against the universities and in favor of giving a share of the television money to the players themselves, not only currently, Greg, and you can speak to this, retroactively, going back decades, that some figure might just eliminate that $7.8 billion windfall that the member institutions are going to be getting from ESPN.
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking me to take predictions, I'm not going to do it, but I will predict this, that revenue sharing is coming for the quote-unquote current players. Whether it's going to be retroactive or not, I don't know. But they all want as much as they can get, and Disney, ESPN, as much as it's still a thing in its current form, wants this thing signed quick, which I think was another reason, Steve, they wanted to move on this, because they wanted to get it in the books. They wanted to get it as an asset, because it does look like they're going to, they pretty much said as much, they're going to more of a streaming model where you got to pay for this stuff, they're going to charge you, and you, Professor and the Pundit, listener, are going to pay for it, one way or the other.
And the planner, Nick Hopwood, can tell you about the possibilities of Disney spinning off ESPN into its own company. And I'm not sure that ESPN as its own company has $7.8 billion, but they want to be able to do this. And maybe, in fact, so they can just have this done for the next 5 years so that Disney as a corporation can go into phase 2 of their operation.
I think they need a cornerstone for ESPN when they spin it off, and this is it. And that's why they're trying to lock it up. You know what else Nick can do is help you save your money and plan your money so you can pay for all this stuff, because it's coming back on us, Steve. A la carte is killing us. We all ask for a la carte, and we're all paying $10 for every channel that we want. All right. Well, so next week, what? More football, no doubt. A little more on the NCAA tournament for sure. We haven't done any updates on our memorabilia, Steve, and stuff like that. We got to do that at some point because I'm still feeling it. I'm still feeling the national championship.
We filled a lot of the show, hopefully with a lot of energy. Hoped you enjoyed it. And again, remember, folks, Michigan football, the undefeated and undisputed national champions. Go Blue, Greg.
God, that's sweet. Go Blue.